All right. Three, two, one. Hey there, fellow Cashflow hustlers. This is your host, Justin Grimes. I appreciate you tuning into the show today as we explore actionable tips and tricks to optimize cash flow in your business and life. With us today is Paul Moore. Paul, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. It's great to be here. Thanks, Justin. I'm really honored.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on the show. A little bit about Paul. After graduating with an engineering degree and then an MBA from Ohio State, Paul started on the management development track at Ford Motor Company in Detroit. After 5 years, he departed to start a staffing company with a partner, which he sold for a little under $3 million 5 years later. Along the way, Paul was finalist for Ernst & Young's Michigan Entrepreneur of the Year 2 years straight. Paul later entered the real estate sector where he completed 85 real estate investments and exits, appeared on an HGTV special real estate episode, rehabbed and managed dozens of rental properties, developed a waterfront subdivision, and started 2 successful online real estate marketing firms. Paul is now heavily involved in the multifamily investment arena, which we'll talk a little bit about later. He also hosts one of my favorite wealth building podcasts called How to Lose Money, and he's a regular writer and participant on Bigger Pockets. Paul is the author of one of the first books I read when trying to figure out maybe what the title is called, The Perfect Investment, How to Create Enduring Wealth from the Historic Shift to Multifamily Housing. He published that in 2016. And some of you know my story. When my father passed away, I began this journey of trying to find ways to create and protect wealth and generate some income for my mother. And Paul's book's one of the first ones that I picked up, and I really appreciated his passion for, we'll talk a little bit. He's pivoted a little bit, and he's still very passionate about the multifamily housing space. But he's just somebody I look up to. So really, really happy and proud of myself for even having you on the show, man.
Man, I'm confused. I don't know whether I should feel like totally ADD from that long list of crazy things I did and bounced around, or if I should feel proud of having the perfect investment, or like a total loser for having a show called How to Lose Money. So I guess our audience will have to figure that out.
Yeah, that's right. They make their own choice there. So with that brief bio that we went through, you mind telling the listeners a little bit more about yourself and maybe what you're focused on these days?
Absolutely. So when I moved from Detroit when it was imploding 20 years ago, and they're doing a little better now, I heard, but we moved to the top of a mountain in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. We had 2 very young children, and we had 2 more along the way. And so we've raised 4 children here in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. And I was doing this nonprofit organization. We were doing like this international student outreach, and honestly, the frequency of it wasn't nearly enough. I was a high energy entrepreneur, and I thought, oh, wow, semi-retirement in my mid-30s not only sounds cool, but it sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. I was bored to tears. I became the worst husband, worst father, worst version of myself. And so a friend of mine and I decided, we heard that we could buy houses on the courthouse steps, and we thought that sounded fun. So we bought one and we flipped it and made like $24,000 in a couple weeks, literally. And so we thought, this is easy, and we'll just do this again and again and again several times a month. Well, it wasn't so easy, but we did do a whole lot of single family flips along the way. Then I graduated to building 7 or 8 modular homes, a stick-built house, did a subdivision, and had a lot of fun along the way, but made a ton of mistakes. And that's what kind of led me to where we are now with multifamily and to the podcast, How to Lose Money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like we've spoken before, I think the ability of being able to kind of take a look back at some of those mistakes that you made and use those as tools and, acknowledge the lessons that you learned. Yeah, it's empowering. If you just act like they didn't happen, you're really missing out. You spent some money and lost some hair, perhaps. I do that more frequently than not, but you didn't gain anything from it, perhaps.
Well, if I would have gotten out of real estate several times after being what seemed to be a complete failure, I would have paid the tuition, and then I would have not gotten the benefit of that tuition. So I'm glad I stayed in real estate. I think I've found my groove now, though, ask me again in 10 years.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, you got yeah, you just it's a journey. So there's not a blueprint for all these things. So you got to roll with it. So
Right.
let's see here. So I wanted to dive in a little bit about I guess a time when maybe your plans in particular fell apart and you had to pivot and hustle a little harder. I know you've got some fascinating stories like you alluded to. So if you'd share with listeners maybe one of those painful moments, if you will.
How many hours do we have?
Yeah. It's
Seriously. No, I mean, like, so one of the first ones in real estate, at least, was when I went to build my first stick-built house, and we had every reason to believe we should have made $100,000 profit. It was a fairly high-end waterfront home on a beautiful lake, and the contractors realized they could take advantage of a guy who didn't know how to hang a doorknob on his own house. And that was me. And so probably not qualified to build a house. And so we lost $40,000 on that. But at that same time, I got a phone call from a guy named David Stevens, and not a familiar name to a lot of people, but he literally said this. He said, "Hey, I run Freddie Mac. I'm the senior vice president of Freddie Mac. And I'm here in DC, and I can't get a realtor to sell me a home at Smith Mountain Lake. Will you help me?" And I said, "Well, I'm a builder, and he goes, "Yeah, but I see you've got a realtor license," because I had to disclose that on my builder's website. And so I said, "Okay." And I'd never been a realtor for anybody before, but I just put the customer service things I had learned into practice and just treated him like I would want to be treated. And he later said I was the best realtor he'd ever had out of 7 realtors. He went on to be in the Obama cabinet as he was in charge of HUD, and now he is head of the Mortgage Bankers Association. So that was how I recovered from my first big real estate hiccup. There were all kinds of small ones along the way, believe me. Right. Another one. Do you have time for another one?
Yeah, please.
So I had almost $2 million in the bank in 1997 when we sold our company. And I ended up about $2.5 million in debt 10 years later. And, thank God it was all connected to real estate because I had a path out. But what I didn't know was it was actually 2007. And I didn't know we were falling. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know we were spiraling into the worst recession since the Great Depression. So $2.5 million in debt. And my partner calls me and says, "Hey, so I'm not going to be able to continue to afford these interest payments, so I'm just going to go ahead and deed this one property over to you." And that was one that we shared. We had about $860,000 in debt. It was a 5-acre piece of land along Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia, and we had planned to eventually cut that into 5 single waterfront lots of, let's say, 1 acre each. And so he was turning that over to me, which basically doubled my interest payment on that piece of land. And so we were going into 2008. And I called 2 friends of mine, and we met at Hardee's restaurant. That's Carl's Jr. for those on the other side of the Mississippi. But and my 2 friends said, "I don't see how you're going to avoid bankruptcy. You might as well start the process." I said, "No way. We're going to give our way out of debt." And they said, "What?" I said, "I think we're going to give our way out of debt." So I actually went home and called my family together. And I said, "Guys, we're going to have a story to remember for a long time. Whether we end up completely broke or we end up getting out of this, we're going to have a fun story. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start giving aggressively to nonprofits, charities, church, etc., things that we're passionate about. And we're going to see if we can pull out of this, because I really believe in the law of sowing and reaping. Some religions call it karma. It's what you give, you'll get back in spades. And I believe that with all my heart. But I didn't really have very many other options, Justin. So what we did is we actually looked at a guy I look up to in history in the 1800s is George Mueller. George Mueller is an amazing guy who started orphanages that eventually housed 10,000 orphans in Bristol, England. And he never asked for a penny from anybody. He basically He never made his needs known to anybody, and he was incredibly generous. So when he would get money, he would give a lot of it out to others, and he funded a lot of other organizations. But at the same time, he had enough money net to house eventually 10,000 total orphans over his lifetime. So I thought, what would George Mueller do if he was in my situation? That's when I decided to start giving aggressively, because though he wouldn't have ever been in debt, he would have given his way out of debt if he'd have been stuck with my situation. So about 4 weeks into this process, last week of January of 2008, I met a real estate developer at a Subway restaurant, and I told him my situation, and he made an offhanded comment about, have you ever tried this? And it sparked a light bulb and then a chain reaction of thoughts that led me to the Planning and Zoning Commission, not the commission board meeting, but just the commissioner, 2 or 3 days later, with my surveyor at my side, who had was looking down with his head in his hands like, are you seriously going to propose this? Anyway, I proposed this crazy idea to use their law that prevented subdividing to actually subdivide the land. And I said, if you read this a little differently, what if it means this? And the lady just looked at me over her glasses, and she's like, you got to be kidding. She said, I've worked here for decades. No one has ever come up with an idea like this. But she said, you're right. And so we actually were able to subdivide that land, and we were completely debt-free 13 months later, right in the heart of the Great Recession.
Man, that's fascinating. Yeah. You could have folded the cards and given up, done the bankruptcy, or any of the number of things. I'm curious, and maybe this be a question maybe for your kids or your wife, how they. That's an empowering story, to be able to put it all out on the table and have that family meeting and say, we're all going to come together and we're going to approach this way. Curious how. I don't know. Have y'all ever talked about that?
Yeah, we've talked about it off and on. I don't think my youngest one definitely doesn't remember it or appreciate the enormity of what we were up against.
Yeah.
But I think my kids are going to remember it forever. I have other stories that are somewhat similar. My son brought up one today, in fact. So they definitely remember. My son's 25. He's killing it flipping timberland.
Yeah.
And so someday you might want to have him on the show.
I thought about that. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I told you. So, but no, I mean, it's left a deep imprint on all of us. And I'm hoping that, our grandkids and their grandkids maybe will even hear this crazy story about how we got out of there. And it just reminded me again that, I don't think there's a formula. I don't think it always would work. I don't think you can always just put money in like a slot machine in the sky and everything will work out. But it did for us that time. And I think it has for a lot of people through history.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. Something similar, I suppose, maybe not quite as dramatic, but you're going through a process right now where you're kind of pivoting on your business plan. And would you mind kind of talking through, I know you sent a letter out to investors, and, it's been a interesting year for you, to say the least, I'm sure.
Yeah, so here we are in the summer of 2018 as we record this, and multifamily has become incredibly overheated, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We don't have time to go into that, but it's very, very difficult for a conservative investment company like ours to find a deal that makes sense. And so we had some investors who were getting antsy and wondering why we couldn't find deals and why other people, in some cases at least, were finding deals. And we have our thoughts on, the possibility that some people are overpaying for those things. But we weren't going to do that. I didn't want to have to look my kids and my wife and myself and my investors, worst of all, in the eyes for 10 years maybe and apologize over and over for overpaying for a deal. And so we saw what happened. I didn't personally, but a lot of people saw what happened in the last recession when they overpaid and they gambled on appreciation instead of looking at the sound fundamentals of cash flow. So we went to our investors a few months ago and said, hey, we've failed you in a sense. We haven't found the type of deals that were going to make you money, but we're going to try an experiment. How would you like to look at another business that's closely related, or at least similar, I should say, to apartments, and that is self-storage. So for a lot of reasons, after researching it for months, self-storage looked really good to us. And one reason is that, well, let's put it this way, 93% of apartments over 50 units are owned by operators. I mean, true blue companies that operate usually multiple assets and professionally run these. 7% are run by one, mom and pops, or 7% are run by, companies that might have just one asset. It's almost exactly the reverse in self-storage. About 80% of self-storage facilities are run by mom and pop operators, independent operators. And so they are, even though they may be profitable, they're not reaching their full potential because they don't have the systems, the marketing expertise, all the things that a professional company would have. And so there are a lot of opportunities in self-storage that people are going to be able to pick up. And Justin, we were kind of amazed at the returns as well. So we are actually, we've synced up with another operator who's an expert in self-storage. We don't want to be like the expert to the level they are. They've been doing it for decades. And we're actually pooling our investors together to invest with them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate a lot of what you just said right there. From while my mom may be an accredited investor, nobody wants to kiss, a certain amount of money away, especially with all those zeros at the end. So for you guys to, have that in mind, ultimately, that's one of the reasons I like y'all's group in particular. It's, capital preservation is important, and for you
First
guys,
rule,
y'all's wallet, and my mom's as well. So, yeah. I'm curious. When you were going out and searching for that type of business partner, can you talk through a little bit about maybe how you made that decision or determination? You may have looked at multiple.
Yeah, we did. We actually flew to LA and talked to one or two out there. We talked to a couple. We also looked at mobile home parks, and we actually talked to more operators in the mobile home park space. And we still really like that space as well, though our investors seem a little nervous about it. Let's be honest, a lot of us have lived in apartments or rented a home. A lot of us have rented self-storage units, but not a lot of investors have lived in a mobile home park. So I think people are less familiar with it. But yeah, we, part of it, and I talk a lot in my book and on other podcasts about following your gut. Quantum physics is showing us, and other studies are showing us, our brains can make 40 quadrillion calculations per second. And there are a lot of things we know from talking to people and from looking in people's eyes. We can learn some of the greatest investors in the world, you may not like his politics, but George Soros is one of the greatest investors of all time. He makes his investment decisions almost solely based, I shouldn't say almost solely, but largely based on hunches. He has a twitch in his lower back, he says. What's that? But we don't do that. But at any rate, no, I went out and spent a day and then another half day with the CEO of this company. And I got to tour about 6 of his facilities. I got to hear his heart. I got to hear about how he, the children he adopts from China and spends an enormous amount of money to help them be healed of these horrible, crippling diseases they were born with. That doesn't make them a great investor, but he is also a great investor. I got to talk to one of the greatest conservative investors in this space, in my opinion, in America, Jeremy Roll. Mm-hmm. Jeremy Roll has been investing with this company for years and loves them. Well, that said a lot to me right there, because he's extremely conservative. He was really conservative 10 years before I was. And I trust his judgment a lot. So that said a lot. Meeting with the CEO said a lot. Looking at their returns and their business plans said a lot. Seeing their office, meeting the other staff, all of that added up to a great, partnership, and it really has been already.
Nice. Yeah. No, I think you mentioned that CEO's maybe aspect of giving. and that may not have a direct impact on his investment criteria, but certainly who he is as a person and the fiber that creates him, you can appreciate that, I know, and that means something.
Yeah,
So,
it really does.
Yeah. As far as, I guess, on, just an important part of growth is planning and setting goals. Would you mind sharing a little bit of maybe about business goals or other that you may have, and maybe how you're going about accomplishing those goals?
Yeah. So I am kind of hesitant to share that, we want to have $20 million in new money under management this year, but we would be just as happy. And I said it all year until the self-storage investment. Again, this is summer of 2018. We made our first investment of the year of about $2.9 million in that. But we were willing to do zero this year as well. And so that's not a goal I want to, live and die by, because I talked to a guy today who said he said he raised a total of $1 billion for several funds he was involved in. And he said they had to deploy that money even if the deal wasn't up to their standard. And he told the company, he said, please don't do this deal. And then please don't do another deal. And they went ahead anyway. They said, we've got to deploy this so we can open up our next fund. And he said that it was the largest deal they'd ever done, and it went south. And so I don't ever want to be in that situation. I will tell you about another goal I have, though.
Yeah, please.
I don't know how much you've heard about human trafficking. I figure where you're located, you're off I-10, I think. There's a lot of human trafficking in that area. Do you know, Justin, if you took the record annual profits of Nike, Apple, General Motors, and Starbucks, added that together, doubled that number, that's less than the estimated annual revenues from human trafficking right now. It is a scourge. And if I would have been alive 150 years ago, I would have wanted to believe that I was an abolitionist standing against slavery. And if I would have been an adult 60 years ago, I would have believed, I want to believe that I was standing for civil rights in America. Well, this is a similar tragedy. And for the people, the 36 million or so people who were enslaved, it is an epic tragedy, and it's happening right under our noses, but it's not getting headlines like those other things that were right out in the open. And so I am dedicating a significant portion of my company's revenue and my influence that I want to achieve to fight human trafficking and rescue its victims. I'm partnering up with a group out of Dallas, and it's called freedomplaceproject.com. We plan to We plan to build a $1 billion office project in Dallas, and then take all of the money that is generated internally by the syndicator and donate that to fight human trafficking and rescue victims. That's first of many projects we plan to do again and again after that. So I just joined the board of that organization. Nice. And we actually are going to be donating to organizations like exoduscry.com, who's exposing the horrors of human trafficking, and like other groups that rescue victims and try to give them a new life. So this is something I'm really passionate about. So to get back to your question, you said, tell me about a big goal. I have a goal of placing $1 billion into fighting human trafficking and rescuing victims. And I think I'm going to raise that goal now that I'm part of this organization.
Awesome. Yeah, that's powerful there. And for people who are listening and want to get involved in that, freedomplaceproject.com.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's nothing that I can think of that anybody could do for us right now. You can check out the website, but if you want to go donate or help in some way, exoduscry.com. Check out the movie Nefarious. It's an incredible movie that is very sickening. My wife can't even watch it. Mm-hmm. It's a horrifying look at the truth behind human trafficking. And if people want to reach out to us, we'll send them a free copy of the movie Nefarious.
Okay. Outstanding. Okay. Yeah, I can't imagine that would be fun to watch, but certainly, can't hide from it either.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm happy to hear you're getting involved in that stuff. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Let's see here. Another question I had for you, segue into, for you, you've been in investing and, running successfully operated companies on a couple different occasions. Where do you turn to when you're looking for feedback or guidance?
For years, I've been married. I'd like to say happily married for 31 years, but we've actually had a pretty rough marriage. I was a type A, highly motivated, running hard entrepreneur, and my wife was really hurt, and she was hurt by things in her childhood that were similar to human trafficking. Let's put it that way. And so we had a very difficult, challenging marriage for years. And I knew that she had all kinds of wisdom, but she also had all kinds of fear. So it was hard to hear her. But I actually have learned to listen to my wife and to really cherish her guidance, her counsel, her input. And so I think for the first time ever, I just want to say to my wife, thank you. And I really want to listen even more to her, even though she knows nothing about business. She has incredible intuition.
Yeah, no, that's outstanding. I'm going to get her email after this and get her a copy of this so she can hear that. All right. No,
great.
Outstanding stuff. Okay. Let's see here. Let's go to, you ready for the rapid hustle round?
Absolutely. I am ready.
All right. First, a word from our sponsors. All right. And we'll get the editor to do all that stuff.
All right.
Awesome. Okay. So 2 quick questions and then we'll give them your contact information and be good to go.
All right.
And 3, 2, 1. What is your favorite resource, book, podcast, or other that you found useful on your cash flow hustle journey?
I have spent a lifetime, really struggling with time management, blocking time, feeling like at the end of a day, week, or even a month, I got very little done toward my ultimate goals. And I read a book that we're all familiar with, like a lot of us read, the book by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan called The One Thing a number of years ago. And I did absolutely nothing about it. Other than I put it in my brain as one of my favorite books, in theory at least. But this spring, I had enough. I said, I have got to make a change. So I went through the book again, and I actually joined the One Thing website. I actually had Jeff Woods from the One Thing on our podcast, How to Lose Money. Mm-hmm. And then I joined his monthly organization, which is only $30 a month. And I actually watched the videos. I doggedly, determinedly, is that a word? Decided to apply this. And so for a book and a resource, I would say The One Thing. You can go to, I think it's One Thing or theonething.com.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. Nice. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice as you began your cash flow hustle journey, what would it be?
It would be to know the difference between speculating and investing. Investing is when your principal is at least generally safe and you have a chance to make a profit. Speculating is when your principal is not at all safe and you have a chance to make a profit. And for years, I would tell people, especially in those years after I made a good deal of money selling that company when I was only in my mid-30s, I would tell people I'm investing in this or investing in that. And I was really speculating. I was gambling. And I made some money, but I lost a lot of money that way. And I now am rabidly determined. By the way, it's fine to speculate as long as you know that's what you're doing. And I would also say, as long as you're not doing that with all or most of your capital. So I am a huge proponent now of at least knowing you're speculating or hopefully not speculating, especially as you get older. If you're in your 20s, take some risks. That's fine. But when you're in your 50s and there's a chance at any given time, my 50s, 60s, 70s, I might not be able to work anymore. And I don't want to be at the nothing part of double or nothing anymore. So I'm not swinging for home runs anymore. I'm not swinging for the fences. I am swinging for singles and doubles and much happier as well.
Nice. Awesome. Help you sleep at night.
Yeah, right.
All right. Finally, how can the Cashflow Hustler listeners get in touch with you?
All right. Well, you can go to my website, which is wellingscapital.com. That's WELLINGS capital.com. You can check us out at our podcast. It's How to Lose Money. And you can also get my book, which is on Amazon. It's called The Perfect Investment. Create multi-generational wealth from the historic shift to multifamily housing. That's a mouthful.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, good stuff. And again, to get back, if you're interested in those topics discussed earlier from Paul, freedomplaceproject.com to learn more. And the movie was Nefarious. If you're interested in learning a little bit more. Okay. That's all I have for today, man. I really appreciate you being on the show. I'm honored to have you on as one of our first guests. And I hope you have an amazing day, man.
Oh, Justin, thank you so much. I'm honored to be on the show as one of the first guests as well. And I wish you the best. Have a great evening.
Yeah. Thanks, man. You too.